Good morning. I'm David Westin from Bloomberg, and I'm delighted to welcome the CEO of Delta Airlines, Ed Bastian, to join us. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us on this very important question of equality. You came out with a very powerful statement to all Delta employees early in the summer in August, I believe, really talking about your commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization. First of all, explain why that's a priority for you personally as well as for Delta. Does it help you fly more planes, make more money, serve your customers better?
Well, thanks for having me, David. I think those are all great questions. The bottom line on this is that we have a responsibility at our company to be not just a great airline, but also a great steward of our resources and help build up our own people, the opportunities for our own team, as well as within our community where we fly and where we invest our time. And one of the things the pandemic has shown to us is the vulnerable have become even more at risk. And it's led to their voices being heard. It's been an interesting phenomena where, as everything has quieted down, as the world has had to come to a stop, it's allowed us opportunity to listen to those people that are actually have been speaking to us for some time, and maybe we've been too busy to listen. And I know at Delta that's been the case, and we've had a renewed focus on racial equality, systemic bias, and injustice, and all the things that we can do as corporate leaders to make a difference in our community.
Ed, in your statement, you actually referred to the need to listen, as you just said, and talked about having town hall meetings and things like that to really learn more from the people at Delta. Have you done that yet, and what have you learned? Because you knew about this issue before. What perhaps new did you find out from that?
We have done a lot of that. We've had regular town hall meetings on large company-wide, tens of thousands of people, as well as on small-scale matters, and we're doing it in many parts of our company. And you're right, David. We've been focused on diversity and inclusion for a long time, and we've got a pretty good track record. We've been making progress. But the one thing that I have paid a lot closer attention to is disaggregating the information. Diversity and inclusion is a broad umbrella. It includes gender, race, ethnicity, and other areas of opportunity. But when you look at the information and you see underneath the specific groups that are potentially not keeping up with the broader economy or corporate opportunities, it's been the Black community. Within, at least within Delta, we've got 20% of our employees are Black, yet only 7% of the top leaders in the company are. And that's a pretty wide gap that we need to commit to close.
Well, that's something that we see replicated in a lot of U.S. industry, I suspect. Certainly the industry I know about it, ABC, we had those challenges. How is the African-American situation somewhat different from other people of color? I mean, there's an issue for all, but as you said, it's somewhat different, perhaps because we have 400 years of slavery, there's history of slavery to account for.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been going on for not just decades, but centuries. And the thing that we've learned here at Delta is that we all have a role to play to owning the issue. It's one thing to say that we've got to get better. It's one thing to acknowledge the numbers. As we said, it's important to be transparent about the numbers, but to really understand the reasons and the rationale and put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's where the listening and the understanding and the reflection are coming from. And one of the things we've talked a lot about Delta is also being truth tellers, acknowledging the fact that our company does not have a great record on this in the past and may have some challenges it needs to correct for in order to be a more just company going forward. And while the leaders of the company may not have been here at the time some of those inequities were first initiated, we have to go back and reconcile and make sure we understand what our company's responsibility is, not just our individual responsibilities.
Part of the challenge we have for all of society, business, I think, and perhaps even at Delta, is it's not just enough to say going forward we're going to be even. We've got some history we have to make up for. How do you do that without alienating people who are not benefited by the actions?
Well, it's a great question, and you're right. There's a lot of people wondering, well, what about me? Or does that mean I'm going to now be by implication disadvantaged relative to an African-American colleague? And the answer is no. The answer is we got to raise the bar for everybody. There are plenty of great, talented leaders within our African-American community that we need to invest more time and more understanding in. And when you look around the room, you see the room is filled with people that look just like you and me. So it's clear that we've had advantages. We may not have been explicit about it, but implicitly we've had advantages, and we've got to bring others along with us too.
Ed, you've mentioned the numbers a couple of times. How do you measure success? How will you know when you've achieved what you need to achieve? And is it basically based on numbers?
It's not based on numbers, David, but one of the things that I know within Delta and as well as within the corporate community is when you're transparent and you're held accountable, things get done. You know, people pay attention, and we never want this to be seen as a quota system or lowering the bar, as one might say. This is about ownership and accountability and being able to measure the success that we're having. So numbers are it's an outcome. It's not the driving force. But when we do see that gap closed, and in the memo you referenced, I've committed to close that gap in half over the next 5 years. So it's not a lot of time to make some pretty good difference. That will be one measure of success. But when I hear from our Black community within Delta that the opportunities, the discussion, the sense of belonging and opportunity is greater than it was, that will tell me that we've really made that difference.
When you talk about closing that gap, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read this memo, and I recommend it to people, you disaggregate those numbers as well. You have the overall population of the Delta employees, but then you have management, and then you have a smaller group at the very top. Are you committed to closing that gap across the entire set of different groups?
Yeah, yes, I am, David. In total, we have about 40% of our team are people of color. About 30% in the low 30s are actually in the leadership ranks of the company, more broadly speaking, from frontline leaders on up, are people of color, and about 18% of our officers are people of color. But when you figure out what the Black component, the African American component of that same population skill set is, half of our people of color are Black, but only a third of our top leaders are Black. So you can see that there's been, even within the designation of people of color, there's been some inequity and imbalance there. And that's what we've got to focus on, how we can do better.
What's been the reaction within Delta to your initiative? I mean, my experience is leadership is part figuring out where to go, but it's also figuring out how to get everybody to follow you. And even the best intention of people down through the ranks have other priorities. I mean, let's be frank, there's an overall economic downturn, and it's hit Delta particularly hard. Is it a real challenge to pursue these diversity and inclusion goals at a time when your company also has some other challenges?
This is an and, not an or. We need to do both. We need to fix the business. We need to get focused on opportunities to continue to let people know that it is indeed safe to travel in the sky, and it is, and Delta's doing a fabulous job of that. Our customers are telling us that. Our customer satisfaction scores in the most recent month, David, our Net Promoter Score was an 80, all-time high. We've never come close to that. The same number a year ago was 50. So people are telling us you're doing a great job. Customers are telling us, but we also have to bring everybody along with us. And you're right, internally at Delta, there continues to be certain groups that wonder if they're going to be alienated as a result of this focus. The reality is the system is structured to help them succeed, and we need to make certain that system is a broader basket to bring everybody into those same opportunities.
And a lot of discussions about diversity and inclusion, one of the things we hear is there just isn't the pipeline. Some people call it talent pool to draw from. In fact, we had the head of a major bank just in the last 24 hours got in a little trouble by saying there's not a talent pool sufficient for African Americans. He tried to dial that back. What is your response to that? How do you find that talent pool, if we can call it that?
I don't think it's an issue with talent. We have incredibly talented leaders within the African American community here in our company as well as in our community. And frankly, David, in Atlanta, which is the birthplace of the civil rights movement in our country, there's no excuses for an Atlanta-based company not to be able to tap into phenomenal talent. The question is, I'd pose a little differently, is how do we go deeper into not just the pipeline, into the education systems, into the schools, into the community to help those that are more disadvantaged get off to a better start in life. And that's where we've also been very focused in. And it's not just in the college and university setting, the historically black colleges where we can continue to do more recruiting from, but going all the way into elementary education and the Atlanta public school systems. And at Delta, we've adopted some schools and we've made them our own. And we've got our employees out there, black, white, Indian, whoever, reading with the kids and helping them with their math skills and helping them through a difficult period of time with virtual learning. That's where the real impact starts. Junior Achievement is another program that we've been actively engaged in our community in helping to accelerate the development and the learning at younger ages. So people at a very early age can see the opportunities to improve are there. And we feel that vested ownership. And I'll tell you, David, and I'm sure you know this, there's nothing like helping kids. And that, in terms of changing your heart and changing your mind around and getting you real vested in making a difference. And we've been able to do that at Delta. At Delta, we've always prided ourselves on being a great community partner, but we can do even more. We can't ever rest on our laurels.
Yeah, I must say there's a lot of psychic income when you see a young person that you've helped along, somebody who's doing it on their own, but they just need a helping hand. No question about it.
Absolutely.
What have you found that you think particularly works at this point? I mean, some people are experimenting now with basically having applications and promotions done sort of without seeing the face or knowing the race or ethnicity of the person involved. Have you experimented with that? Have you seen anything that you think really makes a difference?
I don't know. We've got a it's interesting when you mention that, because one thing that we're working in our business on is how do we get to contactless travel and opportunities using biometrics and things of that sort to speed the efficiency of travel and using, as you say, facial recognition technologies. And we've had some interesting pushback from people of color. Saying that they may not be scanned properly and it may be kicked out, and we're working in certain local communities to do better by that. So I think eventually those technologies will work well, but they're still early in their development cycles.
And we've been talking basically about internal within Delta for diversity and inclusion, racial justice, if you will. You also are acting externally as well. You've taken positions with respect to, for example, the Georgia legislation on hate speech and Minnesota reform of the police. What's the theory behind that? What is the role of Delta in the outside world taking positions on fairly controversial subjects like that?
Well, there should be nothing controversial about eliminating and holding people accountable for hate, crime, speech, reform legislation. And as not just members of the Georgia and Minnesota are our two biggest bases of employment. We're the largest employer here in the state of Georgia, and we're one of the largest in the state of Minnesota. We want to hold our legislators and our elected officials responsible for continuing to improve the outcome for all of our citizens in our communities. And this is an age, David, that it's everything you do seems like there is politicized. People are always looking for a different agenda or a different, you have a different goal in mind or finding a reason not to get along as compared to get along. And we've got to, as corporate leaders, cut through that. We've got to make certain that we're standing up and being accountable and not being afraid of taking a stand in this. I think when you look at public opinion polls these days, it's interesting. Corporate leaders probably have as high a level of credibility and impact in the public's opinion and responsibility as well for making a difference than they've ever had before. And we've got to lean into that and continue to do better.
Ed, you were involved and maybe thrust into a controversial issue early on in your tenure, I believe, with the National Rifle Association. Tell us about that and what you may have learned from that would be applicable today.
Well, this goes back to the Parkland shooting in Florida, and one of the things that right after the Parkland shooting occurred, the NRA came out with a pretty caustic statement, trying to continue to deflect any responsibility for gun control legislation in our country. And when we saw that happen, the kids at Parkland High School contacted me personally I'm easy to find, on email or the internet. People, and it's amazing, within minutes, people will access you, and which I like, because I like being accessible. And said, do you realize that on your website that you give NRA members discounts for travel? You're preferencing NRA members versus the public, and how can that be? And I looked into it, and it was a small discount. It was a 10% discount for members to travel to their annual meeting once a year. So it wasn't a broad-based thing. But I told the kids and I told our team, I agreed with them. I don't know why that discount is there, and we should pull it. And but by pulling it, it caused a whole nother set of uproar within, certainly here in Georgia, in the state, where NRA has a lot of political influence and support. And the state legislator wound up actually not agreeing because of that decision to go along with a tax break. They were ready to approve for Delta. And we wound up losing about $40 million of jet fuel tax breaks because of that decision. And it's at that time I told the governor and the leaders of the state, they need to make their decisions about what they're going to do. I don't agree with them, but we'll make our decisions. And, our values are more important than the $40 million. And it's going to last us. We're going to be around, and we're going to stay in Georgia. We're not going to leave town. There was a lot of discussion whether Delta would actually even leave the state. And I said, we're going to stay and continue to make this state a better place. But we're going to let our values speak for us rather than the tax break.
So, Ed, as you point out, that had some real economic effect on Delta. Maybe even lost some passengers because of it. I don't know. Did you have your board behind you? Because there is a corporate governance issue here. Do you get to decide that all on your own? Does the board have to agree on that position?
David, we had some discussions I had with a couple of the board members, but no, it wasn't a board decision. You don't have time when your values are being examined in today's world. You got to respond, and you need to understand what you stand for and the company's values. And as a result of that, when we saw something that didn't align with our values, that we didn't agree with, that discount for the NRA members, we made that decision. And what I've said is that, at times like this, you don't have time to go and seek consensus. You have to move because you're being evaluated on. And when you don't move, or even if there's a gap in movement, that's an evaluation as a result. So it's more important for companies today to understand what their value set is, what they stand for, and be able to make decisions in support of that without having to go back and check and ask for permission.
Ed, as CEO, how do you choose which social issues to get involved in, which not? I mean, obviously, anti-racism is something you have really staked your flag on, without a doubt. You had the issue with NRA. There are a whole host of worthwhile causes, one might think, things that may appeal particularly to you. How do you pick which ones to go with and which ones to say, you know what, I may agree with that on the merits, but it's not something I'm going to use my position at Delta to back?
It's a great question, David, and it's a political minefield. Right? Once you tip your toe into it, it's hard to get out. But you have to be very careful, because there are areas where you can have impact and you can have influence. And I've tried to be very careful to make certain that Delta is seen as an apolitical organization. We're not trying to be political activists. I'm not trying to be a social activist. I've been accused of that both internally and externally at times. I'm really trying to be the very best CEO and lead 75,000 people at Delta who are of all political persuasions and backgrounds and opinions to do better by our own people and by our community. Certainly helping the disadvantaged and helping those that would appear have been facing inequity for quite some period of time within our own company as well as within our community is a cause that I personally relate to and want to help. But you got to be careful when you pick those battles.
Ed, give us a peek inside the C-suite. Do you talk to fellow CEOs about things like racial justice, diversity and inclusion, or for that matter, gun control? Do you talk about things like this and compare notes on, for instance, best practices?
On racial equity, absolutely. And I think that it's a conversation that's going on inside the halls of every major corporation, because we're all in a similar situation. Our numbers at Delta are not, hopefully, a little better than the average corporation, given that we're based in Atlanta, but everybody has a lot of work to do. We're all in a period of trying to understand what we can do, We don't have a lot of great role models amongst corporate CEOs, which is an evidence of the fact that our black colleagues have not had the same access to the C-suite as maybe our white colleagues have. One person I hold in high esteem is Ken Frazier from Merck. I've been in contact with him over this period of time. You talk about an incredible leader who's actually right in the forefront of the two big issues of our day, both battling the pandemic and developing a cure to save the planet, as well as being an icon as a leader who's managed through as a black man to gain the leadership of one of the most important companies in the world. How he did that and what we can all learn from that to do better.